Hello, my friends. Zik here. I continue to be surprised by this magnificent game. The Slormancer is legitimately one of the best action RPGs I have ever played. And today we're going to take a look at a mischievous mage build that you can use to beat Adam Nostrus and make your way into part 3 of the trials, the final part of Endgame, where you can make your way into the Netherworld and start taking down warlords. This is the direct continuation of the leveling build for Mischievous Mage that I've already posted as a video. In that video, we go in depth on the kind of logic behind the build, all the different skills, why we're using them, etc. So for this video, we're not going to go through that level of detail on the initial skills. I'm going to show you the full setup at the very beginning here, so you have a reference point to set the whole thing up easily. And then we're going to talk through each piece of the build more in detail. However, we're going to be mostly focused on how you can evolve this build to its maximum power to take on Adam, and that essentially includes two slight variations of the build that are extremely easy to switch between. We basically have a power wave clear version with the drum staff, and if you've already messed with the leveling build, that one's going to feel extremely familiar to you. And then we're going to have sort of the invincible bossing, content pushing spark machine version with an insanely overwhelming amount of life leech generated from our indirect damage interacting with the primordial staff of Relentless Transferance. So because I haven't found a good sort of build planner to share the setup in an easy way for this game yet, what we're going to do is right here at the beginning, I'm going to show you the full setup for everything. We're going to go through the skills, which is going to be the same for both builds. Then I'm going to show you the wave clear drum staff setup, which is basically the end game version of the leveling build. And I'm going to show you exactly what you would switch to get into this invincible life leech spark machine version. And so using both of these setups, you can basically swap between them to optimize your playstyle for different parts of the game. So essentially, if you're farming Battlefield, if you're farming Temple, especially if you're in the Forge, you're gonna wanna be leaning into more of the power wave clear version with drum staff. When you're going to take on harder content, you're fighting bosses like Adam, you're making your way into the Netherworld, you're taking on these warlords, you're gonna wanna shift into more of the life leech staff of Relentless Transferance version. And like I said, that swap is very easy, and so we're going to go through exactly what you would need to change right here. All right, very quickly going through the skills here, which are going to be the same for both setups. If you want to understand the logic behind this and why we're doing some of these things, I go through all that in detail in the previous video where we talk about leveling. So if you're interested in that, you can go check that out. So we're running Phlegmatic Caster, which gives us access to Time Warp as our support skill, and then we are running Arcane Missiles as our primary skill and Rift Nova as our secondary skill. So for Time Warp, we are running Experienced Battle Mage, then Clone Wars, then Life Shaper, then Blast from the Past, then Overdrive's Vestige, then Out of Time, then Phlegmatic Scholar, then Remnant Clouds. For Arcane Missiles, we are running Remnant Copycat, we are running Remnant's Wingmen, we are running either Arcane Piercer or Arcanic Tempo, we are running Remnant Lock, we are running Emblematic Missile. For Rift Nova, we are running Remnant's Vulnerability, Greater Rift, Supreme Rift, Insisting Nova, and finally Time Stop. And this is going to be the main thing that's different than the leveling build, where I said this one probably would be good as we needed more defensives, and it certainly is. So those are the skills. This is the exact setup for the drum staff version. So we're going to be using the epic Resounding drum staff of war, which is the evolution of the drum staff. You do not want to use the primordial version with this one. In this case, for our build, this normal version is going to be better. We're running this with Mana Harvesting Rune or the Shoop de Whoop Laser or any other effect that you like that sort of procs instantly and then is over, because we are going to be enhancing it with this Rune of Adrian, and this is going to be giving it a chance to proc again every second for the next 10 seconds. And then we are going to be leaning into our power wave clear killing to essentially be activating this rune constantly. We're going to be investing our first bit of pure Slorm into our Ultimatum of Infinite Wisdom to give us this big experience gain that we can sort of keep on while we're wave clearing. As soon as we're level 100, we'll want to switch that to something else. Potentially this Ultimatum of Profound Depth, which is what we are going to be running with the other staff. Our Ancestral tree is going to look like this. Again, we're going to go through this in much more detail, but here is the Ancestral tree setup for the drum staff. We are going Scorched Earth into Thunderstruck, into Twitching Warp, into Electric Overcharge and Lightning Resistance, down into Charging Up, over to Consistency is Key, and then Elemental Wizard. This is our ancestral stone that we can put anywhere on the map that we get for Adam. Do not worry about this one until you beat Adam. Once you do, drop it into Static Shock. For our attributes with Drum Staff, we are running Toughness up to this checkpoint where we get this extra 15% armor. We're running raw damage up to this 15% Reaper multiplier. We're running Fury up to this 10% crit chance we get between these two nodes. We are running Dexterity up to this big checkpoint to get this extra Reaper scaling. And then we're actually running Bravery to the first two checkpoints, basically to give us scaling move speed alongside big extra scaling crit chance as we are looting stuff and as we are moving through these maps, we're power clearing. Every point beyond that, you're going to want to drop into willpower, as this is going to be our primary damage scaling attribute for this build. Okay, so that's the wave clear version. To switch over into the insane life leech, sort of much beefier bossing version, which still has pretty good wave clear, by the way. And if you were looking to sort of only build into one of these and you didn't want to make this swap, I would recommend building into this one we're about to look at with the Staff of Relentless Transferance, because that one is going to be more powerful for progressing you through the hardest content and keeping you alive while you do so. So in order to do this, first we are going to change our Slorm Reaper over to the Staff of Relentless Transferance, and eventually you're going to want to use the Primordial version of this staff. So for the Drum Staff, we don't want the Primordial version. For the Staff of Relentless Transferance, we absolutely do. Once we have it equipped, we are going to change our mana harvesting rune over to Alpha and Omega. We're going to change our enhancement rune over to the Rune of Vygarth. And then we're going to change our activation rune over to something better than kills, because kills isn't great for bossing. You can see I'm missing a couple activation runes up here. So you can either, go with one of these ones if they're better for you. But for right now, out of the options I have, I usually run this mana one, and it's honestly not that great. I either need to level it up more or I need to find another option, but definitely worth experimenting with a few different activation runes, I think, for this setup. Finally, we're going to switch our Ultimatum of Infinite Wisdom over to the Ultimatum of Profound Depth, which is going to give us incredibly large amount of area damage reduction, which is a lot of the main effects when you're fighting bosses. All right, now coming back to our Ancestral Legacy tree, all we have to do to switch over to the Crazy Life Leech Spark Machine version is take out these 3 stones right here and then put them here. And we're going to talk through more of exactly what this does in detail in that section, but we're basically trading this aura for our Spark Machine aura. Spark Machine deals indirect damage, which has insane synergy with the Staff of Relentless Transference. Along with that, we get extra raw damage scaling, and our move speed can no longer be decreased, which ends up being incredibly powerful for boss fights. When you are trying to dodge stuff, you can no longer be slowed. So this is the final setup with the Staff of Relentless Transference, still keeping Static Shock, which even has higher value with this setup because it benefits not only the Electric Arc from Overcharge, it also benefits the Electric Sparks coming from our Spark Machine. Also remember, once you have, all these nodes kind of maxed out, any extra Slorm you have, after you've juiced your skills a little bit, you're going to want to dumping those into the Ancestral tree basically anywhere, right? And we can see in the top left, that's going to be continuing to scale your elemental damage. So you want to make sure, you're investing your extra Slorm as you get it to continue scaling your LE damage upward like this. For our attributes, the swap is incredibly simple. All we're going to do is take all these points out of Bravery and move them all into Toughness. And this is going to get us to the absolute best part of the Toughness tree. Not only are we getting an insane amount of max life, armor, and defensive scaling here, we are going to make our way to this 6% all damage reduction and 9% all damage reduction. So we're going to get 15% damage reduction here. We also get this crazy LE resist conversion from our armor right now, giving us 4,346 LE resist. All those things together letting us beef our armor, beef our LE resist, beef our health, as well as getting an extra 15% all damage reduction, which is going to stack on area effects with this 35% area damage reduction, giving us essentially 50% damage reduction against all area attacks coming at us. Other than that, the attribute tree is exactly the same. Beyond hitting these essential checkpoints that we're looking for our damage and crit strike here, which is this second checkpoint of Savagery, second checkpoint of Fury, and this third big checkpoint of Dex. Once we have these bases covered, we are going to be investing any extra points we get into willpower to continue scaling our elemental damage. Once you do make this swap, make sure you are turning your R's on. This is going to lock half your mana. And same thing when we swap back, we're going to make sure we turn on consistency is key. This is basically our aura swap. And just to drive it home, I'm going to quickly switch everything back. So if we wanted to switch back to the wave clear version, all we do is open our inventory, click on our staff, switch it back to the drum staff, boom, go to our runes, switch over to the mana harvesting rune, switch our Rune of Bygarth over to Rune of Adrian, switch whatever activation rune we're trying to use for that version into the kill rune, switch our ultimatum over to the XP ultimatum once we hit 100. Probably going to end up just keeping this one on, to be honest, for now. Then we come to our ancestral tree, drop out these 3 stones, put them in here, boom. Make sure we turn on our consistency aura, go to attributes, drop out 30 points, put them into bravery. GG, you are now power wave clear version. So right here, I'm going to explain exactly how this staff works in detail, and this will sort of open your eyes to why this staff is so powerful, specifically for bossing builds and staying alive. Not just bossing, but also pushing into harder content where you're taking a lot more damage and you need, sort of a lot more sustain and survivability in order to push. So first of all, as the base stats at max level, we're going to be getting 150% increased damage, which is massive, along with a 15% increased critical strike chance, with this massive. The biggest mechanic with this staff to understand is indirect damage. And so basically this last paragraph before the primordial stuff says indirect damage is every damage that hasn't been dealt by your primary or secondary skill. Literally everything besides our initial cast of arcane missiles and our initial cast of Rift Nova is indirect damage. Yes, this includes all of our remnants. By the way, a huge majority of our damage in this build is coming from our remnants. So already this build has a huge amount of its damage coming from indirect damage. On top of our remnants, we also have our lightning imbue, which is giving us this electric arc, arcing between targets we spray with our missiles. That is indirect damage. And most importantly, this spark machine is 100% indirect damage. And this is essentially an aura that will just shock everything around you constantly with lightning. So if our remnants, which are the majority of our damage, our electric imbue, which is a big chunk of our damage, and our static field, which is basically the rest of our damage, are all indirect, they are all going to be getting 100% benefit from the indirect effects happening on this staff. So of those, the most important indirect effect to understand is the one right above it. Indirect damage can now leech life and mana. What this means is when you normally see like a life leech roll, you see some percentage, right? You see like a 0.5% life leech, 1% life leech, right? And that's something you can get on your gear to give you 1% of your damage back as health. This makes it so you have 100% life leech on your indirect damage. So 100% without anything extra, right? Without building any life leech, without building any life on it, which we are going to be building some of that for the other variation. And it's just going to make this version even more unstoppable. But wearing this staff, even without all that, we are essentially going to be 100% vamping from all of our remnant damage, all of our lightning imbue damage, and all of our spark machine damage. By the way, not only are we leeching 100% life, we're also leeching mana as well. Okay, so if getting 100% life leech on all of our damage basically for free didn't sound strong enough, check out this next part. Indirect damage deals additional crit strike damage. Additional crit strike damage is equal to your skill damage. So for me right now, all of my indirect damage, which are all of my remnants, my electric imbue, and my spark machine, are all getting 17,156 additional critical strike damage from this staff. That is a massive number. All right, now check out this next part. Overkill indirect damage is stored and dealt as additional damage the next time you deal indirect damage. So not only is all of our indirect damage healing us, it's also has this crazy additional critical strike damage. Any extra of that damage that gets registered on an enemy after it's already dead, like an overkill shot, gets added up and then releases in like a huge damage pop that just sort of like deletes the screen every couple seconds. So on the majority of our damage, we're not only getting this 150% increased damage, 15% crit strike chance at the top, we're also getting 100% life leech and mana leech. We're getting huge amount of additional critical strike damage, and we're also getting any overkill damage to sort of re-explode a few seconds after it gets registered. Now, if all that wasn't enough, when we use this staff enough, I think mine became available like around level 97. When the staff was like around level 97 is when it sort of transformed or evolved or whatever into this primordial version. But this is one of the primordial staffs that we can actually use very well. And this just goes to show you how little of our damage is actually coming from our initial arcane missile and our initial Rift Nova, because we can actually take this Primordial version, no problem. Even though you see the malediction at the bottom, we're losing 50% damage on our primary secondary skill. It literally doesn't matter and will not slow you down at all. I actually somehow felt like my DPS increased when I switched to this primordial version. And the main benediction that it's giving us, like the positive effect that it's giving us, is really good and really leans directly into this idea of having it as like an invincible bossing build, because it essentially gives us one-shot protection. So whenever you kill an enemy with indirect damage, you gain an indirect defense stack up to 50 that lasts 15 seconds. Whenever you're dealt damage, that damage cannot exceed half of your maximum life, because the damage you can take is equal to 100% of your max life minus 1% for each indirect defense stack you have. We are doing so much indirect damage that you will literally always have 50 defense stacks. Thus, you will never be able to be hit in one shot for more than half of your max life. And when you do get hit this way, you're only going to lose 10 out of the 50 stacks. It's not even like they're all going to go away. So you're going to just instantly be back at 50 again. And we can see at the bottom, this is a passive aggressive Slorm Reaper. Okay, so hopefully I've convinced you why this staff is really good. All right, so starting with our Slorm Reapers, for the wave clear version, like I mentioned, we are going to be running the Drum Staff of War, and this is going to evolve up into the epic Resounding Drum Staff of War, and we are going to be using just the normal version at max. Even once we get the Primordial version, the normal is going to be better for us. This staff gives us a 100% pierce and fork chance. It also adds significant damage to about half of our attacks. The other half get increased projectiles. Along with each staff, we're going to want to have a different rune setup. So when you are running the Drum Staff of War, you're going to want to go with either the Mana Harvesting rune or the Shoop de Whoop Laser, which is a little more fun, but I do think this Mana Harvesting rune is a little more effective. There may also be other options here that can be good that I don't have, and I actually don't even know what these are yet. Same thing with the activation runes. There could be a couple other options that could be good up here. For me, I just have the timing one that you start with. I have the one that activates off of kills, and I have the mana one. Of these three, especially when using the drum staff, which is mainly when we're mobbing, wave clearing, killing a bunch of stuff, the killing rune feels actually quite good, especially when it's leveled up a bit like this. Now for our enhancement rune, what we're doing is running this one by Adrian, where it's going to make it so once this procs, every second after that, it's going to have an 11% or, significantly more than that if you level it up, chance to proc again. And that's going to roll like every second after up for the next 10 seconds. So basically, right now on mine, every second after this, casts from getting this many kills, I get an 11% chance at it just casting again. And that roll for 11% happens 10 times over the next 10 seconds. So the odds that this effect triggers again from this rune is quite high. And I was getting, 3, 4, 5 lasers in a row sometimes from just like getting lucky with this rune. And you can basically get the same exact kind of effect out of the Mana Harvesting rune. And I do think the Mana Harvesting rune is probably going to give us a little more value in the end than the laser beam, even though the laser beam is just wicked cool. When we switch to our Staff of Relentless Transferance, we're going to just move a couple runes around. And it's not crazy. And the main ones we are going to be switching to are our effect rune. We are going to move to Alpha and Omega, which is the black hole. And we actually have really good synergy with this rune because they are more powerful and their area is bigger when we're at half mana. We are always at half mana because we have half of it locked with our aura. And so essentially we are going to get, maximum value out of this rune. The coolest thing about this rune is these black holes count as indirect damage. So all the indirect damage stuff we were talking about with the staff, just add constantly rotating black holes around you to that stack of indirect damage, healing us, having this additional critical strike damage, adding to this crazy overkill pop effect, plus having this 150% increased damage and 15% crit chance at the top. We're also going to switch our enhancement rune just over to this effect one to continually scale the effect of our black hole. You're also going to want to switch the activation rune because when we're bossing, we're not going to be killing that many mobs unless it's like, a boss with like a ton of ads that's spawning. You're going to want to move this. If you don't have anything good, I honestly recommend moving it to the timing one. But I end up using this mana one. But honestly, even though we're kind of pumping mana, this one doesn't proc as much as I would like it to. So I'm hoping to find some better activation runes. And if you have one of these other runes and that's working better for you, then I definitely recommend that. But I think, just kind of experimenting with different activation runes, especially in a boss scenario where you're not getting the volume of kills through. I think in most scenarios, this kill rune is going to be hard to beat with the speed that we're kind of clearing. But once you're kind of, in more of a isolated arena against the boss, like something like the mana rune, something like the timing rune is probably going to have a little higher value. The other really big thing here, guys, that's going to make a huge difference that I strongly recommend is leveling up your ultimatum of profound depth. And you can see here, if I look at my ultimatums, the only two I've leveled up so far are my XP one, and I did this very, very early on to just get maximum value out of it. And then from there, the only other one that I've really touched is this ultimatum of profound death. And this basically just gives us free 35% area damage reduction because we're not building area damage reduction anywhere else. We basically just get this 35% for free, and all we have to do is sacrifice a little bit of extra XP, but that doesn't even matter, when we're just taking on one boss. So basically, with the drum staff, you want to have your XP ultimatum on until you get max level, then you can like find something else. Honestly, this one is still very good with the drum staff if you're, just in any sort of hard content. And then when you're going, into boss mode, or when you're pushing content, when stuff's getting harder, you want to switch your XP ultimatum over to the ultimatum of profound depth. And this is just going to give you a lot of extra damage reduction against area effects, which are, by the way, all the crazy things on the ground that you're trying to dodge, which is a huge amount of what is coming at you in boss fights. All right, now looking at the Ancestral Legacy tree, it's going to be a similar thing where there's just going to be a couple little things we switch between the two. So this is our drum staff version. So this is the version we want for hyper power wave clear. And you can see right here, this green stone, this is my Ancestral stone. You're not going to get this one until you beat Adam. So don't worry about this stone. Don't worry about this node until you beat Adam. And then you're going to be able to drop this green one in here and always have access to these extra arcs happening for your overcharge and for your spark machine. So for the drum staff version, we're going to have access to Scorched Earth, which is this lightning seal we can drop down. It's nothing crazy. I don't even cast it a ton, but it's mainly good for bosses or like big guys that aren't moving. You can just drop it there for some nice big chunk of extra elemental damage. And one of the main things we're doing to really make this build pump as we're coming into endgame is getting access to this consistency is key. So this setup is basically trying to get as much lightning damage through as possible, because this consistency aura, which is essentially the aura we're trading for spark machine in the drum staff setup, is going to make it so all of our lightning damage, instead of rolling, so lightning damage in this game and in a lot of games, it rolls in a huge variation window where, look, if I take this out, see how it says my electric arc deals 1 to 9,731 damage? That's, basically anywhere in that window the damage can roll, right? So I can be unlucky and I can roll 1 electric arc damage. It's going to do basically nothing. I can get really lucky and roll almost 10,000 electric arc damage. It's going to slap. It could roll anywhere in that window. So it's, there's a ton of variation essentially in how much damage each electric arc is doing. And this is true for every lightning skill. We can see if we look at Thunderstruck, 1 to 53,000. If we look at Scorched Earth, 1 to 33,000. Lightning skills in general have this huge variability in their damage. So what this consistency is key aura does is it makes it so that window can only roll in the top 30%. So as soon as we take this, all of a sudden that one goes away and it's more like, well, I gotta turn it on, duh. More like 8,070 to 11,000. So all of a sudden, we can no longer roll 1 to 8,000. All of our damage is going to be in the upper 30% range. That is a huge increase in overall DPS. That concept and that math, especially with how much elemental damage we're building and how much of our damage is coming from lightning. So the primary thing this is doing for us is giving us extremely reliable, huge electric arc damage, and we're going to amp that even further once we get our Ancestral Stone by letting those arc up to 3 more enemies at once. This is going to be further empowered by a massive bonus to elemental damage here based off our max mana, combined with a little cooldown ability we can use if we want, where as we're fighting, we're going to build these power charges very quickly. Once we're at 50, we can rip this charging up, and it's going to give us 25% cooldown reduction, which is going to let us blink faster. It's going to let us twitching warp faster. It's going to let us lightning seal more often. And so twitching warp is the other really big skill you're going to be getting out of this pathing that you're going to be wanting to utilize a lot. And this is basically your second blink. So we're going to be using our primary blink to get out our temporal clone to help us shoot remnants. And we're going to be basically trying to blink on cooldown. We kind of want to use Twitching Warp as our defensive. So it's like you want to use blink offensively to get clones and to like move yourself ahead and like speed clear. And then you want to hold kind of Twitching Warp for when you get in trouble, you have a blink to reposition. So I basically use Twitching Warp sort of as my defensive blink. I use Time Warp as sort of my offensive blink to get me my clone army shooting remnants. And then the final two things we get access to here are a little more just for pathing to get here, but they don't hurt. So one of them is Thunderstruck, which is going to just make it so anytime we Ancestral Strike, we're going to get this free giant Thunderbolt that comes down. And this is also benefiting from Consistency is Key, where we can no longer roll 1 to 44,000. It's going to start at 44,000 and scale up. And then finally, we're running Scorched Earth. And this ability is pretty lackluster in my opinion. I mainly use it on bosses or like big guys that aren't moving, that are taking a second to chunk. That's when you want to drop a Lightning Seal on them or a Scorched Earth and just, you know, kind of cook them as you're trying to blast them with missiles. Okay, so that is the setup we are running with the drum staff for wave clear. When we switch over to our invincible bossing mode and take our primordial staff of relentless transference, we're going to do a couple really easy switches here. All we're going to do is take out these 3 stones and we're going to move them right here. And so what this is basically going to do, it's going to take away this Consistency is Key thing. It's going to take away this elemental damage and this charging up node. And we're essentially trading that for an infinite amount, not infinite, an insane amount of life leech coming from this constant, unrelenting damage of Spark Machine. And we are basically pathing there, getting this extra raw damage, which certainly doesn't hurt, massive amount of raw damage with the additive and the multiplier here. And we are finally ending on Unstoppable Force, which makes it so our move speed can no longer be decreased. So in a setup where we're trying to live, in a setup where we're trying to vamp and dodge mechanics and kill bosses, this is actually a super powerful node that kind of, when you're running it, you probably won't even notice it, but if you haven't been running it, you will notice it because you'll be getting slowed by frost effects, you'll be getting like caught in stuff, like anything that kind of hinders your movement, this just completely eliminates, and that's going to make it much easier to dodge all these crazy area of effect boss mechanics. We're holding on to Static Shock here because it actually has even higher value with this setup, because it not only lets the electric arc from our lightning imbue hit up to 3 more enemies, it also lets our Spark Machine hit up to 3 more enemies. And by the way, both of these are indirect damage that are vamping for 100% life and mana. So if we're hitting more enemies, we're getting more life, more mana per shot. Other than that though, you can see it's the same exact setup. We're still running Scorched Earth into Thunderstruck, into our defensive blink, Twitching Warp, into Lightning Imbue. The only difference is we're pathing to the right instead of kind of down here. So we're taking Raw Boost, then we're taking Spark Machine, then we are taking Unstoppable Force. So this is sort of the final setup with the Staff of Relentless Transference. All right, now let's take a look at the attributes tree and how it's going to change. So I've messed with this attributes tree a lot, and I'm constantly switching stuff around. I know it looks a little weird, but this is such a powerful setup for the drum staff. And the only thing we change when we move into the Invincible Leech version with the Staff of Relentless Transference is we're going to pull this Bravery out and we're going to put it into Toughness. So in a nutshell, what we're doing here is trying to get the highest value extra nodes to benefit our build in this early chunk of the tree. And so there's a lot of juicy, beneficial things in these little minor chunks in between big nodes and then at these big nodes that benefit our build. And there's some that don't, that we intentionally sort of avoid. And so at first I wasn't running armor, but as you're coming into endgame, you're going to find that this first chunk of armor leading up to right here is incredibly valuable because every single node is giving us 1% armor, but then we start to get additional max life on even the little nodes as we work our way up here, right? But then we're also getting a huge amount of max life on this first little node. We're getting 10% armor on this little node. We're getting 15% armor on this little node. And then the biggest one is right here. We're actually going to get 25% of our armor as elemental resistance. And so percent armor, max health, and elemental resistance, really high value, big chunk of the toughness tree that you're really going to want to move into as you're coming into endgame here. Next, taking a look at savagery, we started with more points in here, but basically as less and less of our damage is coming from our actual arcane missiles and Rift Nova, essentially more and more of the percentage of that damage kind of moves into willpower, because so much of that becomes elemental. And so we've essentially like had raw scaled up to around here before. We've dropped it sort of all the way back to where we really just want to get these Reaper damage multipliers. So we're getting 10% Reaper damage multiplier here. We're getting 15% Reaper damage multiplier here, and we're getting, 10% raw damage along the way. Now, a similar kind of idea, this first chunk of Fury is actually so incredibly strong. And so in this first little node, you get 4% crit strike chance. In this second node, you get 6% crit strike chance. So these first 10 points in Fury, they give you 10% evasion and 10% critical strike chance. That is massive increase to critical strike chance, a significant DPS increase. You can see we actually ended up moving all of our points out of determination. In the leveling build, we had an early chunk here that was actually pretty valuable. And we've basically moved this up into armor because we're getting this armor conversion into elemental resistance. We essentially no longer need this, and we no longer need the mana regen or the life on hit either. So essentially all of our determination has moved into toughness. We've never really built Zeal because we're not trying to engage with any of these extra effects, and we already have infinite mana gen coming from the leech. Probably our most important stat, especially as we're coming into endgame, is going to end up being willpower. Because so much of our indirect damage is elemental, every point we invest in here is going to help scale our indirect damage, which is going to scale the healing we're getting from the Staff of Transferance. So Dex has a similar situation to Fury and Savagery, where I think a couple of the first nodes in the progression are very strong. So this first one gives us plus 40 max Reaper damage. This next one gives us plus 5 max Reaper damage. I think this is a typo. That's supposed to say 50 because it doesn't make any sense that it would give us 40 and then 5. And if you look at the pattern of these other nodes, they all go up a little bit from 1 to 2, right? And so this is most certainly supposed to say 50 max Reaper damage. But then we're even going a little bit further into Dex because we get this really nice extra effect from this third node here, which is that your secondary skill, our Rift Nova, has a 40% chance to slow enemies by 30% for the next 5 seconds. So essentially everything we're Rift Novaing under all the time before we missile it is going to be having a chance to get this extra crowd control, just this nice 30% slow. Okay, so the most experimental thing we're doing is this bravery path right here. And this is something more recent that I did, but it actually freaking slaps, especially for when you are looting stuff. So when you're making your way through the battlefield, when you're making your way through Slorm Temple, when you're making your way, basically anything besides the forge, anything where you're grabbing items off the ground or moving, this it becomes really, really strong, mainly for these extra 2 effects that I'm mousing over here. So whenever you pick up a new item, you gain a greed stack, granting you 1% critical strike chance for the next 10 seconds. This effect stacks up to 15 times. So you can basically get a free extra 15% critical strike chance as you're looting stuff along the way. And then it's a very similar one here. Whenever you walk a yard, you gain a Strider stack, granting you 1% critical strike chance. Whenever you deal critical strike damage, you lose your Strider stacks. So essentially, as you walk, you gain critical strike chance, and anytime you crit, it basically like resets. And the other thing that makes it really good for just kind of speed clearing is every single one of these nodes in between is giving us move speed. So even though we have double blink between our time warp and our twitching warp, if we build this bravery path with the drum staff, we are also going to be able to be cruising in between our blinks. And we're also just going to be getting this extra Slorm find along the way, extra influence gain. And so, basically this is extra power farming, critical strike damage with movement. This is like our power clearing drum staff look. So the main thing we're going to switch between builds when we move over to our Staff of Relentless Transferance here is we are going to take this bravery out, because when we're fighting a boss, we're not going to benefit from looting at all, and we're going to get fairly minimal benefit from this movement one. All right, so something like this with your extra points just continuing to go into willpower is, in my opinion, what's going to be the best setup for the drum staff. When we switch over to our Staff of Relentless Transferance here and look to go into Invincible Bossing mode, what we basically want to do is drop all this bravery out because we're no longer going to be benefiting very much from, you know, kind of the power farming, movement speed, crit chance from looting. We're not going to be able to loot anything in a boss arena until it's over, right? Like, so essentially the value of bravery really falls off when we kind of go into a bossing arena, in my opinion. All we're going to do is take all these points out of bravery and move them all into toughness. And this is going to get us to the absolute best part of the toughness tree. And this is basically going to give us 1% melee damage reduction for enemy and every enemy within 3 yards. It's going to continue giving us the armor and max life for each little one, right? When we hit this first big one, we're going to get tenacity, which is the crowd control resist, more tenacity here for 35% total, all the way up to this final node here. So this is, you know, going to give us significantly more armor percentage, significantly more max life to just help scale our survivability, ending with this special effect that our secondary skill has a 30% chance to blind enemies for the next 4 seconds. So when we are fighting a boss, the odds that it is blinded is going to be very high. And at this point, if we want to be even safer, we can actually drop 10 more points to get a lot of damage reduction. So we can actually get 15% all damage reduction, which is a crazy amount if we just do this. And so in my opinion, when you're, especially like when you're going to fight Adam, you want it to look something like this, where you're using your Staff of Relentless Transference, you're getting a huge amount of defensive scaling with armor, max life, and then all these extra little nodes, big elemental resistance based off your armor, more extra armor scaling, crowd control resist with this tenacity. You get this damage reduction when enemies are around. You get chance to blind your target. And finally, you get 15% all damage reduction, which is a massive amount, especially when you consider the fact that that's going to be stacked with your Ultimatum of Profound Depth, which is already giving you 35% damage reduction on area effects, right? So that all damage reduction will be on the top of that for all area damage. And from here, basically, I would just put any extra points into will. And so essentially the mantra here, and if your survivability is good, you can basically do this where, you know, if you feel like you don't need, you know, this kind of much toughness, you can just start dropping them out and start dropping them into will. And so you want to kind of like, basically, depending on how hard stuff is for you, you can essentially, you know, juggle between these two bars where you trade a little bit of damage value for survivability or the other way. And in my opinion, when you're taking on Adam, if you are able to, even if you skip some of these other points somewhere, if you're able to get your toughness up to here, I think this is going to, with the Ultimatum of Profound Depth, this is going to give you a much better shot at bringing him down. So yeah, something like this is what I would look at for the bossing version for the Staff of Relentless Transference. Any extra points beyond this, I would probably just keep put into will. And so I don't know if we really want to go, we're never really going to be below 20% life, so we don't really want to go above this little checkpoint in the toughness bar. I think this is kind of give us max value for the most amount of defensive we need. And then any extra we want to just dump into will for more elemental damage. Okay, so last big piece, and maybe like the most important piece here, is going to be the gearing. And I don't want to overcomplicate things here. So I'm basically just going to do my best to tell you guys what I sort of did and how I think that helped me defeat Adam. And so essentially what I did is I used the leveling version of the build to clear 100 wave Wrath 5 Forge. And from all the gear in that Forge chest, I found a couple upgrades, and those upgrades allowed me to do a Forge Wrath 6, the same thing with 100 waves. And then that chest got me even more gear. So between the Wrath 5 and the Wrath 6 chest, you're going to be getting item level gear anywhere from like just below 80 up to like item level 85. So anywhere between like the item level 75 and 85 range is where you want to start investing your resources to scale stuff up. In my opinion, you really don't want to use many crafting resources at all for leveling. You can make your way into endgame without essentially dropping any resources into crafting if you just use a powerful build setup, and the leveling build that we shared the other day will get you there. So if you're struggling to do that, you know, if you're looking for a strong build, you know, that could get you there without having to craft, that one can. Once you're acquiring item level like 75 to 85 gear, that's when you want to start looking for the right pieces to really invest resources in. And essentially what we're trying to do is build just enough defensives to just survive huge bursts of damage. And remember, we got this like one-shot protection in our staff happening now, but you often are taking like multiple hits at once. So even if this saves you from getting one shot, you know, you're often still taking a bunch of damage following that up. And so essentially what we're trying to do is scale our armor and LE resists and max health simultaneously. So when you're looking for gear in this game, what I've realized is like the main things you kind of want to pay attention to are the stuff towards the bottom. And I'm not talking about like this Corey Ironbender, Arcane Missiles, Willpower. Like that's all extra stuff you can add later. I just recently threw all that stuff on. All those were blank before. You don't need those to take on Adam. We didn't have any of these to take on Adam initially. Okay, you don't need like this crazy crafted stuff. What you're looking for to determine if a piece of gear is what you want are like the rare and the epic stats, along with if it has a pure stat. And a pure stat is when you see this like exclamation mark, like you see on the all damage reduction here. It can have 1 exclamation mark, it can have 2 exclamation marks, it can have 3 exclamation marks, and that's essentially signifying the power of how pure it is, with 3 exclamation marks being the best. And the reason you're mainly looking at the rare stats and epic stats is because it's very, very cheap to re-roll the base stats and the magic stats to exactly what you want. So when you're looking at gear, you want to think about the base stats and the magic stats, and even the rare stats a lot of the time, being malleable. You can make those what you want. You're trying to find roles to build around. So a good starting point, like for this build, to kind of you know, drive this point home, is when we're looking for gloves, chest, and helmet, we want life on hit or life leech. And I have dream gloves because I rolled both, and I was looking for life leech gloves forever. And I finally found one with life on hit on the rare stat and life leech as the magic stat. And you can get these in the epic stats, but basically somewhere between the epic stats, rare stats, and magic stats, you want to find a life on hit roll and or a life leech roll on your gloves, on your chest, and on your helmet. And essentially the way this works is as we're moving into endgame, life leech is going to become more valuable than life on hit because we're starting to do so much damage that this 1% is starting to have a really big impact. However, for this specific build, the way we are flinging absurd amount of projectiles with our drum staff and the way all those projectiles are piercing and forking, we are hitting everything a ton. So yes, life leech is going to give us good health off of our damage scaling, but life on hit is still going to be very good for us even into endgame, simply because of the sheer volume of things we are hitting. And the main reason you're going to want to find these rolls is because this is what's going to let you run the drum staff and still be really safe. You actually don't even need these rolls with the Staff of Relentless Transferance. If you really like the way the Staff of Relentless Transferance feels and you're going all in on this version of the build and you know, don't even want to mess with the drum staff at all, then I do not think you will actually need this life on hit or life steal because we are getting this crazy leech effect from the indirect damage. However, when we're bossing, we maybe want all the life leech we can get. So not only are we leeching 100% of our indirect damage back, we're also getting life on hit still from our missiles, which aren't benefiting from this leech, right? Because that's the one part of our kit that's not indirect damage. So essentially with the life on hit, and even the lifesteal percentage makes it so our direct damage is vamping off life on hit and our indirect damage is vamping off of this indirect damage effect. I think the other really cool thing you'll find that rolling life on hit on your gloves, your chest, and your helm will give you is it lets you test any Slorm Reaper you want at any given time. You know, unless you're doing like really hard content at that time, basically anytime you get a new Slorm Reaper, you can confidently just throw it on. You can see I have a lot of just random levels in a lot of these because I love just like trying them out for a little bit when I get them. If you have life on hit, you can do that. Basically, you know, this gives you the ability to always be able to sustain off of your damage, no matter what staff you're using, what runes you're using, It's just an incredibly strong kind of base amount of regeneration we can gain as mages, where we're healing off of hitting a bunch of stuff with our missiles very consistently. And, you know, it basically just gives you a floor of survivability to keep yourself alive. Okay, so life on hit and life leech, sort of the most important stat, in my opinion, that you want to focus on and build around, especially in the leveling version. That's purely the most important thing to worry about. But now that we're trying to take on Adam, we not only need damage, we also need significant defensives, really armor and elemental. Evasion is sort of secondary, where I think it helps, but I don't think you necessarily need to build evasion. You can take it as extra rolls if you want, but what we're really focused on here is armor, ele resist, and max life, as well as elemental damage and raw damage, with priority being on elemental damage. Okay, so just to keep it simple, for our damage rolls, we're looking for elemental damage and raw damage. For our defensive rolls, we're looking for armor, ele resist, and max life. For all of these, you're going to want to have some healthy mix of flat numbers and percentages. And you can see on a lot of these pieces, if you already have the flat number, that's when you can roll the percentage, and vice versa. So like, for instance, on this chest piece, I have the max life on the base stats. I can't roll another number max life, but I can roll a percent max life. So I re-rolled my defensive stats to find a max life percentage to stack with the base max life above it. And it's basically the same exact idea with armor and the same exact idea with elemental resistance, where you basically, anywhere you can kind of find them, you want to get big armor roll or ele resistance roll numbers, and you want to find extra percentages on top wherever you can. And I'm kind of, sort of slow hovering everything here so you can see it. And there's definitely other things we want. And my gear is not finally crafted, guys. This is not, I have not spent the time like, re-rolling everything to the nth degree to make it perfect. A lot of this stuff I've just took, but I have crafted it enough to where the base stats align to give me almost 50% armor and 50% ele resist. And I think trying to shoot for above 40% for both of these is going to really help your chances against Adam, but you really want to combine that with max life. So a big focus on max life, base numbers and percentages, armor base number percentages, and ele base number percentages, almost as much of that as you can kind of get as you're going through your gear. And anywhere in between that you can find an elemental damage roll or a raw damage roll, you want to take it, right? So like, big raw damage shoulders. And by the way, like, raw damage, which is scaling our skill damage, also scales the crit damage of our indirect damage from this crazy staff. And so even though a big chunk of our damage is ele damage, raw damage is definitely still beneficial for us. I do think if you had to choose, you should pick elemental damage. And so if you really wanted to min max, I think you're going to get the most value out of having like as much stacked elemental damage as you can get in this build. Now, taking a look at like more miscellaneous stats that you want to keep an eye out for, all damage reduction is always extremely strong. So definitely be keeping your eye out for all damage reduction rolls, because on basically any piece, all damage reduction is going to be good. What you don't really need is area damage reduction, because we're running this. And remember, this bottom part of the ultimatum, your area damage reduction can no longer be modified by any other effect, upgrade, passive, or equipment. So when you're running this, if you have any area damage reduction on your gear, it's going to be doing nothing. So you want all damage reduction. You don't want area damage reduction. We don't really need anything with Ancestral Strike, Inner Fire, Overdrive, Pierce Chance, Rebound Chance, Fork. Like, we're not really doing any of that. Any of that we need is coming through the setup already. Couple other little niche things that we do probably want is move speed on our boots, as well as critical strike chance wherever we can find it. And so basically, the higher our critical strike chance, the more often our indirect damage is going to get to benefit from this massive critical strike damage we have coming from our skill damage on the staff. So anywhere you can find an extra critical strike chance roll, that's also going to go very far on your gear. We don't need any mana regeneration. We don't need any max mana. We don't need any mana on hit. Like, I should re-roll this rare stat on my bracers for sure. And that's because we are getting all of that from either this effect from the Staff of Relentless Transferance, or if we're using the drum staff, we're then getting our mana from this passive under Time Warp, which makes it so anytime we gain life from life leech, life on hit, or life on kill, we gain the same amount of mana. So all of our life on hit that we're getting is getting converted into mana. And so in either version, we have infinite mana sustain without building any mana onto our gear. All right, so hopefully that gives you a good idea of sort of what you're looking for and how to set everything up. And then once you definitely don't need this stuff to beat Adam. I beat him without adding all these extra rolls. But if you really have a piece that you think you're going to take like deep into endgame, you're going to want to spend some mats and roll these extras on the bottom. And the extras are basically, you can roll extra attributes of any of them. You can roll extra skill mastery, and you can roll Reaper mastery. And so the main consideration here is that our Staff of Transferance is Corey Ironbender school, whereas our drum staff is Astorius. And so you kind of want to pick like whichever one of these you think you are kind of leaning into more. You want to like put on your gear. And in my opinion, if you're not sure, you want to go with this one on your gear, because this is the staff you're using to do the hard stuff. This is the staff you're using to beat bosses, beat warlords, push into, you know, the hardest content. And so you want this version of yourself to be like min-maxed as powerful as possible. So in my opinion, you want to turn that, instead of rolling Astorius like on this chess piece, which is for the drum staff, you want to turn all those into +5 Corey Ironbender. And that's just going to give you, you know, really big affinity scaling. And affinity, if you're not aware, is what you can upgrade over here at Corey Ironbender. And it's the school of the staff. So we can see, if I look at the Corey Ironbender affinity, I have 46 points in the upgrades, which is giving me, you know, some amount of this. But then I also have 43 coming from my equipment points as well. And so that's putting us at level 89, which is giving us almost 45% Reaper damage, you know, 45% effect multiplier. And, you know, which the effect, that's the other thing, is, in my opinion, the effect on this staff is significantly better than the effect on the drum staff. So if you had to pick, you know, one of these affinities to really build into between the two staffs, I think the Corey Ironbender affinity is better because of how many effects are on this staff. And all of these, you know, sort of effects are going to be scaled by this 45 and even more as we level it up increase, right? And then for the attributes, it really doesn't matter which attribute you get as long as it's one you're using, because, you know, in the attribute tree, we can just juggle them around. So you can see I have like 3 in Fury making this up. So it's like, as long as, you know, you land the attributes in one of these 5 categories that we're actually using, it doesn't really matter, you know, where or how much is where. And then finally, the skill mastery. Like I said, mine is certainly not min-maxed. I kind of just wanted to get stuff on here. I think if you were trying to min-max, you probably want most of your skill mastery to be arcane missiles. I think we're going to get, you know, kind of the highest value. I'm eventually probably going to re-roll all these over to arcane missiles when I have the resources to do so. But having something on there certainly doesn't hurt. So that's basically what I was doing for this first step here. And probably when I, you know, kind of get the next upgrade to these pieces as I'm doing the Netherworld stuff, is when I would, you know, look to really like min-max everything to the nth degree and get it all perfect. But in order to do this, like if you weren't aware, when you're at the forge guy over here, Frederick, and you're in here, anytime you throw anything in here to craft, you can reforge all of the, you can do all that right here. You just have to scroll down on this menu. And I didn't even know you could scroll down on here until someone told me on stream. So this is the menu that makes crafting completely deterministic, where, like I was saying earlier, like if you find good magic stats or rare stats or epic stats, you can literally re-roll these base stats to be exactly what you want. And you can see that's what I did on this chest. I re-rolled till I got armor, then I locked it, then I re-rolled the second one till I got max life, then I re-rolled the scores till they were high in the number. You see the max life is maxed out at the top of the window. And so you can basically do everything here to perfect your gear. The difference is, as you get down into rare stats and then as you get into epic stats, stuff gets more expensive from like a gold cost and a resource cost. So basically, you know, finding the stats you need down here and then modding the top stuff to match, you know, the rest of what you need is, you know, kind of like the most efficient way to do it, like cost wise. And like I said earlier, I don't think you necessarily need all these extra rolls at the bottom to beat Adam. I did it without them, but they certainly wouldn't hurt. And so if you have pieces that you know, like this chess piece, like they're like item level 75, 80, but they're good enough to carry you, you know, to where you would maybe get a level 90 plus item or something like that to replace it, then I think it might be worth, you know, dropping those on there. And some of them really aren't that much, right? Where if we just like throw a random helmet here and look to add attribute stats, it's 5 of these virtue Slormite, right? So as long as you have enough of these and 12,000 gold, you can get yourself some attributes, just extra power, right? So especially if you're maybe struggling a bit with him, I do think it could be worth, you know, trying to beef up some of your better pieces with these extra rolls. And kind of the only piece we haven't talked about here that's really strong for this build is this Shroud of the Arcanewalker. And this is going to give your Remnants Pierce chance. And this is basically our drum staff cloak. And we're going to want to find a different cloak. We can use this. I actually, you know, use this on Adam, even though I meant to switch to like a bossing cloak. But basically, we're not going to be benefiting from this pierce chance on a boss, right? Because we're trying to kill the boss. So like, it doesn't matter if we pierce him or not. Like, we're just trying to hit the boss, right? So the value of this wave clearing remnant pierce goes down significantly with the Staff of Transferance. So I think looking for more of like a health cloak or like a bossing cloak or like a defensive cloak that you could sort of carry around and switch on, like basically when you switch to your Transference staff, you can make this one little gear swap where you just like same time you're trading your ultimatum, you know, from your XP ultimatum to your profound, you just switch your cloak away from your Arcanewalker over to like a health cloak, a defensive cloak, you know, something with damage reduction. But yeah, basically just considering having a defensive cloak or like a bossing cloak you could throw on because we don't need the pierce chance. All right, and there's one kind of combat thing I want to mention here that you're going to feel as you start to play this build, and that's that shadow effects stop healing. And so the extra effects like the shadow mark on the ground, the shadow buff that enemies can get where they hit you with shadow confusion, those will completely turn off your life leech. So what that means is it also will turn off your mana gen because all of your mana gen is coming from your life leech. So when you get hit with the shadow effect, you will essentially not be life leeching at all and you will not be mana leeching at all. And it will completely shut down your sort of infinite electric battery mojo. For that reason, really the main time you got to be careful and sort of pay attention and dodge stuff is when shadow effects are in play. When you're doing Forge, never pick the shadow card. Avoid shadow cards in the Forge at all costs. Anytime you have to deal with a shadow effect in a map or on a boss fight, just do your best to dodge it. If you do get hit by it, just blink away and try to play super safe for 3 seconds because you're basically going to have 3 seconds where you can't life leech. And if you try to shoot in that time, you're also going to make yourself to where you can't even shoot an ability after that. So basically, shadow effects equal bad. Dodge them. If you do get hit by them, just back off for a second so you don't die until you get your life leech back, and then destroy everything right then. Boom. And that's pretty much all we got for this one. So I hope that information was useful. I really hope something like this can help you beat Adam yourself and move you into endgame. If you have any questions on the build or feedback or things you think could make it better, I love seeing that stuff in the comments. And if you did find it valuable, don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to see more Slormander and RPG build content. With that, I just want to remind you to take care of yourself and keep blasting. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace. All right, Adam, you motherfucker. Your 2 hats. He has this, like, watch, he'll point at me and he'll step. He does it right at the start usually. Right there. That move will one-shot you. Or it was, at least. Oh my god, look, my warp stops that wall. It's actually insane. Oh. It gets like super crazy in here in a minute. Yeah. So I think here I gotta kill these pillars. These ghosts, he spawns all these ghosts to try to chase you, and you always gotta spawn the necro, or oh, move the coast. He spawned these necros. You wanna murder these necros like ASAP. The necros spawn the skellies, which overwhelm the map. Then we kill these ASAP. Try to dodge the billion things happening. Freeze that because we're gangsters. Blink it. Bomb. Kill the skelly guy. Ow. Dodge that. Kill the pillars. Skelly guy, dodge the laser, dodge that. Pillars. Ow, 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 ow. I dodged that big thing, like I didn't dodge it, my dodge mechanic dodged it, my vision. That one hurt. I did not get hit by this. Oh! Alright, pillars. Oh no, I blinked into it. Oh no, it's GG. Oh! Wow, we just had too much life steal. Alright, literally almost just killed myself at the end there. Skelly guy's out. Just take care of him in case. It's GG. Come on, baby. Come on, baby. Yes! Let's go. Woo! Also just gotta dodge better. It's this, all these bosses have this like immunity phase where they shield and spawn minions. And I feel like that's my weakest point, because if I can't leech, if I can't attack even for a sec, I can't leech and then I can just die. But I have 50 stacks here, so I literally shouldn't be able to get one shot. Yeah, I just lost. Okay, now I got him back. See, like, I think it's a Franklin thing. So we're not even really like threatened here. Alright, slow and steady here. Get the clone army out. See what's up. Stay out of these lightning rods. I was born in it. Molded by it. It's going pretty well. Yeah, let's go.